And go for it.
Hi Ben, so the last couple of weeks have been pretty intense. We've seen a major conflict break out with Armenia attacking Azerbaijan, reportedly attacking residential areas. Since then, it's gotten worse. They're now reporting of shelling of many major cities inside Azerbaijan, and the two countries have been accusing each other of launching attacks on civilians. However, much of the media coverage has been focusing on the Armenian story. What can you tell us about what's actually going on, and how do we break through the rumor mill and the exchange of mutual accusations? How do we figure out what's actually going on and who's telling the truth?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. So, information warfare is real. Most people don't realize that. They hear about it, but they don't understand it. We're getting a first-hand shot at what information warfare is here. War is war. There's always a story or something going on. Pardon me. My throat's a little dry today. There's always a story from both sides. So it's never going to be clear one way or the other who's telling the truth and who's not. You kind of have to sift out. You have to sift through the trash and figure out who's telling the truth and who's not. In the case of Azerbaijan and Armenia, that's pretty simple. It goes back to August when you and I were dealing with the ambassador of Armenia in that meeting, broadcast here in Washington, where I was trying to get him to provide the satellite photos to show where Azerbaijan had attacked Armenia. I mean, shelling and explosive ordnance, any of that is going to leave a scar on the ground. And the reality of it is they couldn't do that and they wouldn't do that. We are aware that there is actual fighting going on right now. That's not in question. There are many other things that are in question when it comes to Armenia and Azerbaijan, such as certain media outlets being allowed to cover the conflict, certain media outlets not being allowed to cover the conflict on the ground, and having to sort through information from both sides. As we see, Azerbaijan has a tendency to tell the truth. They can provide evidence that has dates and timestamps and geolocation. Armenia is unable to provide that. In fact, a lot of it looks staged, much of it looks fake, and regardless of what they're trying to hide or what they're trying to cover up, war is ugly, and it's better for them to show the world what they're actually doing rather than hiding everything and taking the victim stance.
But even with these timestamps and other evidence that Azerbaijan has provided, a lot of people are not buying it, or at least they seem to be disregarding that information. Is it not enough? What's going on? Why is this provision of accurate information appears to be insufficient for the most of the international community and the media?
So that's another multi-part question here. When it comes to the media, except for outlets such as us, money makes everything happen. So they get paid by Armenia and their proxies and their supporters to tell one side of the story or another. Most people in the United States, with the exception of the diaspora from both countries, don't really care about what's going on. They tend to go with popular opinions. So Armenia has sunk millions of dollars into making sure that celebrities and sports personalities are taking their side because it looks like it's cool to play the popular opinion card. And the other thing that Armenia has done is they're using Christianity as a shield, which here in the United States, it's a sad reality that anytime people of Christian faiths hear that there is a quote unquote Christian population that is fighting a war, they're automatically going to turn their resources and their thoughts towards that particular group. And so it really comes down to money and influence. As far as the average American goes, or even the average European that doesn't understand the Caucasus, they float with popular opinion. So whoever has the biggest media presence is going to win the information warfare in the United States. Doesn't matter what country you're with. That's how that's going to work.
So you just made some pretty controversial statements. You're saying that Armenia is essentially paying off celebrities, paying off the media, spending a lot of money to generate publicity. But Armenians will tell you it's a small and poor country. That's kind of part of the whole deal, the whole media coverage. That Armenia is too small to fight, to be an aggressor. And if that's the case, it's certainly too small and too poor to fight major media wars. Where is that funding coming from, if there is any? And what's the evidence that they're actually paying people off or investing into these celebrities?
So Armenia itself is a small country, but they are by no means poor. That's part of the disinformation campaign. They have gross domestic product, and they generate revenue like any other country does, or they would cease to exist. Now, they may not be rich in comparison or wealthy, but the fact is their supporters and the people that are behind them provide them with almost like a blank check to sway the situation. In this particular case, Russia has a lot to do with it. Their influence there is high. Russia has bases that operate out of Armenian territory, and Russia has no problem establishing their own foothold, particularly by providing money and influence. Here in the United States, I'm not going to say that all Armenians are bad, because I know some that are not horrible people. That will make me unpopular with a certain sect, but that's okay. There is also a portion of the population here that is heavily involved in the mob. They are heavily involved in the drug trade. They are heavily involved in human trafficking. They have connections and ties to the drug cartels, and that's an open fact. They also have funding that comes from the Middle East. There is a Qatar connection there with a certain sheikh, and I'd rather not say his name in this broadcast. We can get into that at another time. That funds these people and uses them for his purposes. Here they also use intimidation factors. Most people aren't going to realize this, but I've actually been targeted. Of course, you know this. Not once, but twice. I'm not going to go into the specifics of what happened the first time, but the second time, the FBI and the police department notified me of a threat before it ever got to me. They had actually stopped an individual in his vehicle that had a weapon and ammunition, and a brief description of myself and our business practices and our business location, and he was coming to kill us. And that's unacceptable. I'm not a combatant in this case. I'm not physically fighting them. I'm standing up for the truth.
So, is there any evidence that these attacks, that these operations, whether organized by the mob, is there evidence that they're connected to the Armenian government or any entity representing the government?
The evidence, it speaks for itself. I look at the protests that took place in Los Angeles, which is about an hour north of me. They poured out in huge support. They they basically did the same thing that Antifa does, and they surrounded a CHP cruiser and they attempted to gain access to that vehicle. Um, there are stories in the news from reputable news sources that indicate that law enforcement has been cooperating with these people for monetary gain, and that ties into ongoing legal issues right now that they can't really be openly discussed. Um, but there is an established pattern of support from Armenia, whether it be directly from the government or the diaspora, or a cultural link between these individuals that causes them to essentially get together in a clique and pool their financial resources. They are by no means poor here in the United States.
So you're basically saying that there is a sort of a fifth column in the U.S. pushing agenda on behalf of a foreign country, including violating U.S. laws and attacking U.S. citizens. Is that what you're saying? Is that what am I understanding this correctly?
Absolutely, and they don't realize that they're doing it. They double back on themselves all the time. They talk about certain territories in the United States belonging to them because large amounts of population live there, such as Los Angeles. It's all over social media. Anybody that wants to discuss that with me can reach out to me and we can have an open and honest discussion about it. Um, they make claims that 40,000 Americans have left America to go fight on the side of Armenia. The reality of that is, um, if they do that, then they give up their constitutional rights to citizenship in the United States. If I'm not wrong, I mean you're the lawyer. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's not unheard of for U.S. citizens to be living in other countries, to have dual citizenships, and to be fighting and to join foreign militaries. But all of that, of course, is questionable, especially if the aims of that foreign country are at odds with those of the United States. And here we seem to have a very murky situation at best. You're saying there are Armenian civilians who are engaging in illegal activities, and there is the corruption in the law enforcement is such that there is no real way to get to the bottom of who specifically is behind it and which people are involved and which people seem to be, even if they're not directly involved, they seem to be approving of these practices. But how do you get a real investigation going? These are pretty serious allegations, and we don't want to smear an entire segment of population. We want to figure out who exactly is involved in these activities and who supports them, and how we go around addressing this afterwards.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point there, which is part of the reason why the U.S. as a whole and as a nation has elected to remain on the sidelines of this. Um, there are Armenians that live here in the United States. There are equally Azerbaijanis that live here in the United States. They both deserve to have their voices be heard, and it is wrong to take the actions of an entire or a small segment of a population and hold it against the population as a whole. What's going to have to happen here is the appropriate authorities are going to have to get involved outside of the conflict. Part of the problem is right now, if they come out publicly, then it looks like law enforcement agencies and such in the United States are taking sides in the conflict, which is going to be dangerous for the U.S. government.
And what about the Armenian diaspora? Are there voices that are opposing to the particular tactics that are being employed by some of these gangs and so forth? Is there any sort of internal resistance? Are there any alternative perspectives from the community itself that may be worth highlighting?
Well, the reality is I can't speak for those people. I can just go based upon what I see. And I'm not seeing any outward push from anybody in that community. That is not to say that everybody in the community supports that, but they're not openly engaging the people that are causing the problems here in the United States or elsewhere in the world. I mean, anytime the Azerbaijanis want to protest, the Armenians show up and start shooting at them, or beating them, or throwing stones at them, or glass bottles. I mean, it's ridiculous. If
So we
if
have
it
this we have this conflict that is from a completely different region being exported to the U.S. territory, and that is certainly not in the U.S. interest. How do we address that as a country, as a community? We do not want to have confrontations and physical attacks on U.S. citizens based on an issue that's quite frankly not a U.S. issue. It's an issue of two different countries.
well, I have a difference of opinion there. So I'm going to put it to you this way: as a country, we cannot take a stand on this.
Hmm.
But there are members of our country that also have ties to both sides of this conflict. And I'm not going to tell them that their voices don't matter, because both sides have a voice. Both sides have a voice. It's not saying one or another. What what we need to do here is make sure that the protests can remain as calm as possible. That's part of the beauty of being an American, is having the ability to speak freely.
And this actually brings me to the other point that you made about the religious aspect of this conflict. Based on basic reading of it, the conflict seems to be ultimately about territory. So how did this religious question come in, and how is it that so many people who are generally critical thinkers are buying into this mirage of religious, of some new crusade or whatever they imagine this to be? And a lot of these people have never been to either country quite, and don't really have much experience in that region. So how do they have credibility to comment on these issues based on third party talking points?
Well, that is a good issue. So the reality of it is, there are people that are raised here in America, but they are raised by their families to believe that they're going to return back to their mother or fatherland, as the case may be. Um, that's very different from religion. So let's be honest about it. I'm not going to take sides in this fight. Um, because once again, part of being an American is I don't have to tell you what religious beliefs are acceptable and which ones are not.